So I do have the tiebreakers here. It looks more complicated in writing than I think it is in practice. But essentially, so the four teams tied with 2 losses right now: Colorado, Arizona State, Iowa State, and BYU. If that's and they don't play each other, there's no cross contamination there. If that stays put, it's Arizona State and Iowa State. If one of those teams loses, okay, so if Colorado loses, it's Arizona State and Iowa State, so status quo. If Arizona State loses, it's BYU and Iowa State. If Iowa State loses, it's Arizona State and BYU. And then BYU, if they lose, then that's when it gets real messy. So if BYU loses, if Texas Tech defeats West Virginia, then another layer onto this. If Baylor beats Kansas and Cincinnati beats TCU, it's Colorado versus Iowa State. Otherwise, if Kansas beats Baylor and or TCU beats Cincinnati, then it's Colorado versus Arizona State. And then if BYU loses and West Virginia beats Texas Tech, it's Arizona State versus Iowa State, right back to square one. And there's another layer. I mean, this layer is crazy. So there's four for the teams who are 5-3. So that would include Baylor, West Virginia, and company. They would have to win and then see 3 of those 4 teams at least also fall, and then they would play the one of those 4 teams that won. So clear as mud.
Very clear. But I mean, isn't it just amazing just looking at this, like all the potential factors, all the potential, like this is unbelievably unpredictable, and the amount of routes we could go down is very interesting. And we'll get into our final week games, but I mean, like, what is the most what's the most, like, what do you think is going to happen, Brandon? What do you think is the most predictable coming up?
I mean, so I mean, as we kind of mentioned with what went crazy this last week, is the status quo would be, all 4 of those teams would win. Colorado's got Oklahoma State.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's more likely to happen? Colorado beats Oklahoma State, or Oklahoma State goes an entire season without winning a single Big 12 game. Watch out. Kansas plays Baylor, so
That's
they're
right.
not
That's
any of the
right.
2 lost teams, but crazy game. Watch out for that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Kansas State plays Iowa State. That's not a cakewalk. BYU's playing Houston, so you would think that you'd feel good about BYU.
Yep. Yep.
And then Arizona State plays a real down Arizona team. If I had to, I mean, Kansas State's the one that really scares me in this realm as far as messing
Yes.
things up.
I would agree with that. Like, because I mean, BYU, I think, has got a very favorable game against Houston. I really do like Arizona State's odds, even despite a rivalry game. And I think Colorado's got a very healthy game coming up against Oklahoma State. That Iowa State Kansas State game, you're dead right, Brandon, is an ultimate wild card. And I'm not sure. Did it say on that sheet if all 4 teams win with the 2 losses, how that would play out?
That would be Arizona State and Iowa State.
That'd be Arizona State and Iowa State. So, for a team like Iowa State, they just got to win. For a team like Arizona State, they just got to win. But boy, for Iowa State, that's not an easy game. And Kansas State definitely can create some headaches. But I don't envision a scenario where one of those 3 lost teams makes it. I'd be pretty shocked if 3 of our 2 lost teams lost this past weekend. But, who knows? I mean, that's kind of the thing that we're trying to figure out right now.
If Iowa State does lose, that's what I'm rooting for, is one of those 3 lost teams to make it in. Just because I think it would be kind of funny. Now, on the flippity flop, for the pro Big 12 beat, I think that also makes the Big 12 pretty susceptible to being left out of the college football playoff. Less so with Army losing, but a 3-loss Big 12 champion probably isn't great optics for the Big 12. But would be also very funny and very on brand for the league.
At this point, I mean, this league is so freaking unpredictable that it almost would feel right. It would almost feel like poetic justice if we did have a 3-loss team make the conference championship game. And though I don't envision that scenario, wouldn't it just feel right, Brandon? Wouldn't it just feel like all the stars align just perfectly on this bizarre season 1 of this new era of the Big 12 conference?
That would feel very on brand. It because I think first of all, Arizona State and BYU being in the leaders in the clubhouse when it comes to this kind of tiebreaker scenario also feels very on brand.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma State and Utah going a combined 1-15 against the Big 12. That feels
Mm-hmm.
on brand. What a year! It would be very that
Mm-hmm.
would seem about right. I do have a hard time imagining more than 2 of these teams losing, especially like Arizona has such a they're playing so good and Arizona's playing not so good. But and BYU is a real good matchup with Houston, so it's really tough to see them lose. But the other two, I mean, that's boy, and Iowa State also has that 10-game threshold hanging over their heads. Like that's such a tough spot. And you're going to get Kansas State's best, especially after Farmageddon last year or Snowmageddon.
Yeah, and Brandon, it's going to be. I mean, it's going to be cold throughout the Midwest on Saturday, but that's going to be a frigid night in Ames. Like that's going to be single-digit temperatures. Who knows what that wind chill is going to be? So, boy, and they had snow last year. I don't think they're going to get snow this year, but it's going to be a bitter, bitter night. In K-State, Iowa State, that is a rivalry. Farmageddon's tough to beat, and you know K-State's pretty hungry after Iowa State got them on their turf last year.
So then let me flip the script on you, Drew Russell. How do you think this plays out?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think, I'm just going to say straight up, I think all of our teams that are at 7 with the 2 lost teams right now win. So I'll just say it's Arizona State and Iowa State, which, Iowa State, I think we viewed as a dark horse going into the season as a potential Big 12 championship game contender. Arizona State, we sure did not. That has been just what they're doing under Kenny Dillingham has been absolutely special. It's been phenomenal. We'll get into their game this weekend, but it's definitely been just incredible what they've been able to put together in terms of optics from that effort.
Yeah, I mean, I guess statistically speaking, that is the most likely outcome. Because if those two win their games, that's what's going to happen. Or BYU and Colorado still need something else to happen on top of their win. So I guess statistically speaking, if you're at the craps table, it's most likely going to be a 7. That is the right move there.
Yeah, it's definitely the right move, Brandon. And I really am going to be fascinated to see going forward. We talk about teams building legacies this season. What do these teams build going forward? And you look at BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, Iowa State. What they've done this season's been special. So you're right. Like what they do will be fascinating to see.
You're right, and I think when we start talking legacies, because we've talked even coming into the season how important like this year, next year is for the conference. There's such a power vacuum, that so on and so forth. But it's really going to come down to how these teams. Unfortunately, it's all going to come down to how these teams play in December and how they stack up against SEC, Big Ten, ACC opponents. Unfortunately, TCU still gets the laughingstock bid for how they did in the national championship game, despite hanging up a zillion yards on Michigan. By the way, being the only team in the world to ever beat JJ McCarthy while he was at Michigan.
People
put
forget.
him in a phone booth all night. But that's going to be the arena for the Big 12 to build respect or lose respect. I mean, if you're just looking from a brand standpoint, you're going to have Georgia and Texas. You're going to have Oregon and Ohio State, and you're going to have Arizona State and Iowa State. I love it.
Yeah.
Football sickos love. College football fans love that shit.
Yeah.
But the suits who are pulling the strings, Greg Sankey is going to have that, on a press release, like, hey, look what's going on over here.
Mm-hmm.
So on and so forth. So that's where legacies are going to be built year in and year out
Legacies are going to be built. And
in the
I
Big
think
12.
too, Brandon, I mean, we talk about the Grim Reaper of Kansas. It's too bad that the Big 12 has kind of this season played the way it did, because like the SEC got slammed this weekend with some of their at-large teams like all losing. I really wish the Big 12 would have been better positioned, where maybe we had more, still had an undefeated BYU team, or still had like a one-loss Iowa State team or something like that going in, where I think Big 12 could have potentially have gotten multiple at-large teams, and we're not going to. This is going to be a one-bid league more than likely. I don't really envision a scenario where we have multiple teams, but I think for sure, like, for the legacies being built is so important. And again, this upcoming week 14, we're going to see some legacies built, and whoever's that first conference champion, that is definitely a huge thing for recruiting. It's huge for morale for a team. And obviously you get the opportunity to play in that college football playoff.
Yeah, and trust me, Drew, I stayed up all night last night trying to calculate what's the best path for the Big 12 to get multiple teams in. I mean, unfortunately, it's more likely that they get 0 teams in than they do 2 teams. They'll almost certainly get one. The real, like, I don't know, wild card would have been if Army had beaten Notre Dame. Then that kind of opens up to you take a 2-loss Big 12 team or an undefeated Army team. We don't have to worry about that. Shout out the Irish, who, by the way, are sitting as pretty as it gets. I mean, they have USC this week, but a 10-2 Notre Dame team probably still gets it, but who knows?
Yeah.
Boy, if you just take away Kansas, like if you just send Kansas to Missouri or wherever they're playing their games, because then you have Colorado, who's on the inside track for a Big 12 title game, and a 10-2 Colorado gets in for sure. If they have the opportunity to send Colorado in, they're doing it. You have a 1-loss Iowa State and a 1-loss BYU. Now that we're talking about a lot of 9-3 SEC teams, 11-win Big 12 team, I think, has the opportunity to get the edge there.
They would have, but again, I mean, these are hypotheticals at the end of the day, Brandon, and gotta live in reality. I'm learning that right now, just in life in general. Like, reality is, we've got a bunch of losses in the Big 12. We're gonna have our conference champion get into the college football playoff, and there's still 9 teams that technically could make a conference championship game going into week 14. So over half the league still has that chance, which is pretty unique, Brandon. That does not happen every single day.
No, it does not. And when we talk about the format of this playoff, I'm very in favor of how it's built up now. But eventually we are going to get to that 14 team where all the bids are kind of specified. Like, this league is this many teams, this league is that many teams, which I don't think is good to inherently give a conference an advantage just because of what they've done in the past. But that's the reality that we're in. If I'm going to take one moment to be like, that's pretty cool, that's going to be way less exhausting, I have to imagine. I mean, obviously there's still wild card spots that are going to be hemmed and hawed over, but man, this is just exhausting.
It is exhausting, but that's college football, Brandon Shanahan. College football is just straight up exhausting sometimes. And there's a reason there's so many pundits nationally that try to break this thing down. That's why we love it. And that's why we just keep on cranking the tunes. Like, that's why we do it. We love the exhaustion.
I know. I'm tired. One thing I did want to kind of go over is what would happen if we were still in the 14 playoff? Because Oregon,
Oregon
I mean,
would be in great shape. They're
Oregon
done.
would be in
Like they'd
great
be
shape.
in.
Getting all 61 first place votes is pretty crazy, by the way.
Yep.
So shout out
Yep.
Oregon.
Yep.
Georgia being up at 6. This is actually the first time I'm looking at the AP poll. This too makes me sick. Shout out SMU for making it to the top 10. That's sick to me.
Yep.
That doesn't feel low enough. But so yeah, the winner of Oregon Ohio State's in for sure. I think if Ohio State wins and both of these two teams get in, then SEC champion between Texas and Georgia. And then yeah, that final spot would be pretty contentious. 11-1 Notre Dame, hypothetically 11-1 Penn State, possibly a
Yeah.
10
I
and
mean,
2
honestly, God, I
Texas.
mean, Oregon. I mean, and granted, this would be based if we still had like old conferences as well, Brandon. Like if Texas was still in the Big 12, I think things would be a lot different as well. But the big battle would be between Penn State, that Notre Dame team with just one loss, but that one loss is pretty difficult. Uh, but boy, the 4-team playoff. Imagine if this was still the BCS era. How would they break down all those 10-1 teams? Like, how would the computer
Ooh.
work with that, Brandon? So, like, let's go even a step further. Like, how would the BCS computers break those teams down? I have no idea.
Yeah, crazy stuff, man. But what a weekend in college
Insane.
football. And you're right. Yeah, the way that the SEC is kind of unfolding, it does kind of lend itself favorably to. It's going to be pretty favorable to the ACC because if Miami and SMU both win next week and they both get in, I wonder how the ACC tiebreakers go. I wonder if I could find that
Let's
because
find out.
that's they're all going to have one conference loss, and I don't think any of them have played each other.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, every conference has such bizarre and wild tiebreakers that it's just so unpredictable. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay, so it looks like so SMU. Fun fact: SMU's already in the ACC championship game.
Yep.
So I guess they have then. Oh boy, so a 2-team tie goes to head-to-head competition between teams. We don't get that this year. Winning percentage versus common opponents. So I mean, bring out the calculator. That's what's going to take.
Let me see if I can find mine, Brandon. Must be in.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, let's calculate this. We can do that.
Because right now, I mean, because ACC, because Notre Dame is thrown in there too. You have Miami. Miami still, I mean, that loss to Georgia Tech for Miami is a painful one.
I know that's so tough.
That going to put them out of the ACC. Could be a multi-bid league, but I kind of doubt. Well, I mean, I guess it would be like Notre Dame. Technically, they're still independent. But it is just, I mean, but these tiebreaker scenarios, I mean, are so much different compared to the old days, Brandon, where you had divisions, you had everything that just was a little more straight to the point. And now it's just not. It's not
Okay.
at all.
So Miami would get the tiebreaker because they both played Louisville. Miami beat Louisville. Clemson did not.
Okay. That makes sense.
Because I don't know if you remember my real chaotic scenario last week was Clemson loses to South Carolina this week.
Yep.
Miami could still lose this week and
Yep.
send Clemson in. And then Clemson beats SMU in the ACC title game. And then in that world, we also had an undefeated Army, competent Big 12 team, so on and so forth. I guess that's still kind of what I'm rooting for. But yeah, I mean the ACC is still in pretty good shape. Where's Clemson at in the AP poll? Clemson is right at 12, so it's not out of the. Boy, the ACC doesn't not have a chance at 3.
I mean, they do have that opportunity. I mean, SMU is still kind of a fascinating case. I mean, they're in good shape. Clemson, you mentioned, Brandon. Clemson's going to be I think, the ultimate wild card team because I think they play South Carolina this weekend. That's a South Carolina
That
team
would be a good
that's
win.
playing. Yeah, they're playing a lot better. I wouldn't be shocked if South Carolina was able to find a way to victory in that contest, but um, who knows? I mean, that remains to be seen. So
Yeah, that would be interesting. It would be Clemson's only ranked win. So I don't think that they get Clemson in without a conference championship.
yeah,
And Miami plays Syracuse, so Syracuse isn't exactly. They're 8-3. Boy, the ACC stinks, dude. I mean, I'm sorry, the ACC stinks.
they do. They do.
I mean, my gosh.
That's where I'm just struggling to see where they would be at from a bid standpoint, Brandon. And again, we're going to see what the committee says on Tuesday. I mean, this is a fascinating committee rankings because so many big teams lost over the weekend. And who knows who's going to be the highest ranked Big 12 team will be kind of an interesting debate as well. Where will the league be sitting in that perspective? So things just to keep an eye on there, Brandon. I mean, it really is just interesting in general.
So let me double check to show. And let me ask you this, Russell. Do you value ranked wins at the time of the game or where they're currently at?
I think you have to throw it in a mix, right? Like at
Yeah.
the time of the game, because a team could be completely different in September compared to where they are right now. But at the same time, like, if Texas A&M defeats a ranked Arkansas team, this was a few years ago, like that was a good win in September, but that Arkansas team turns out to be 3-9 on the season. I mean, I think it's a mix, Brandon, and sometimes you have to play that into factors, but oftentimes you do have to look at that record at the end of the season and say, you know what, those rankings in September just weren't completely accurate compared to where they were in November and December.
Yeah, it's because I just asked because Louisville was ranked when SMU beat them. They were not ranked when Miami beat them. So, like, do you evaluate that differently? I don't know, but essentially, what I was going to look up is, and I guess the easiest way is at the time. So, at the time of playing the game, how many ranked wins combined do you think Clemson, Miami, and SMU have combined? Those three teams now 11 games into the season, 33 games total played between the three of those. How many
I don't
wins
know.
were
Like,
against ranked teams?
I don't know. I'll say 5, 6.
2.
Oh man, that's
2.
brutal.
And like I said, one of those was to a Louisville team who was ranked 22nd at the time. Louisville no longer ranked. Pittsburgh was the other team that was the ranked win. And I don't think they are currently ranked. So I guess if I were going to ask how many of those 33 games were wins against currently ranked teams, it looks like 0.
Wow. That's an insane stat for 33 games for your top 3 teams in the conference, and there's 0 ranked wins in general. And the committee has those numbers too. Like they're not blind to any of this, but that is a mind-boggling stat.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, because I mean, there's no other ACC teams ranked, and that's the problem that I think we're running into immediately is these super conferences. Because I mean, you look throughout the country. I mean, Texas has played a wildly different schedule than Georgia has.
Yeah.
Oregon and or Ohio State in particular played a very different schedule than Indiana in the Big Ten.
Yep.
And then the ACC, you have these three top teams, and none of them play each other one time. Now, granted, you probably would have expected Florida State to be in that mix and not SMU, and those have some overlap.
Sure.
But I mean, my gosh, how did that happen?
It's college football, Brandon Shanahan. It's college football at the end of the day, but it is kind of just, but it shows just the different era of these conferences as well. Like most of the ranked teams are going to be found in the Big Ten and the SEC, and maybe the talent pool. Well, we've talked about it. The ACC, not the same that it was 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago and beyond. I mean, look
Unreal
at the depth
stuff.
of Florida State. I mean, Florida State, insane. I mean, they're going nuts yesterday, winning what against a 1-10, Charleston team. Like they're going crazy after every touchdown. So, just a different time frame for sure.